Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has stressed that any EU plan to use frozen Russian assets to aid Ukraine must strictly follow international law and protect Eurozone stability. The European Commission's proposal would allow governments to utilize up to 185 billion euros from these assets in 2026 to 2027 amidst falling US support for Kyiv. Paris's Louvre Museum has reopened 3 days after the thieves stole historic jewels worth an estimated 88 million euros, which is $102 million. Visitors have now returned to the world-famous museum as authorities continue investigation into the high-profile heist. Taiwan's defense ministry has announced plans to deepen military cooperation with the United States through strategic dialogues, reciprocal visits, and joint exercise observations to safeguard regional stability. The move comes amidst growing Chinese military pressure, with Beijing conducting normalized joint combat patrols. Poland has accused a Ukrainian national of spying for Russia after he allegedly shared photos and coordinates of Polish military infrastructure with the Russian speaker. Prosecutors said the suspect, detained with 30 grams of drugs, expressed pro-Russian views amidst rising tensions in the region. The anticipated Putin-Trump summit in Budapest is on hold after Russia rejected a ceasefire proposal following the postponement of a Rubio-Lavrov meeting. Meanwhile, a report by the International Service for Human Rights has revealed that China and Russia have repeatedly sought to defend, or rather defund, UN human rights programs over the past 5 years. Uganda's Electoral Commission has set January 15th as the date for general elections, where 81-year-old President Yoweri Museveni will seek re-election after nearly 4 decades in power. Museveni faces main rival Bobi Wine, who accused his government of fraud and repression as Uganda prepares for a highly contested vote. Two teenagers were killed and 5 others injured in a suspected gang-related shooting in Johannesburg, South Africa, according to local police, as the provincial anti-gang unit and crime intelligence teams continue hunting 4 armed suspects who fled the scene. Nigeria's Foreign Minister Yusuf Tugar has said US tariffs have a limited impact on Nigeria compared to other countries. He further added that Nigeria is diversifying trade relations with China, Brazil and India while pursuing strategic autonomy. Russia and Ukraine have exchanged some of their heaviest overnight attacks in weeks as both sides launched large-scale missile and drone strikes. Ukraine's military says it targeted a Russian ammunition plant and oil refinery in the Bryansk region using long-range Storm Shadow missiles. According to sources, Russia responded with barrages on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, firing 28 missiles and over 400 drones. Meanwhile, Moscow also claims to have captured 2 more settlements, Pavlivka and Ivanivka, in the Zaporizhia and eastern Donetsk regions, as its forces continue to push along the front lines. Well, the escalation comes amidst uncertainty over a proposed peace summit between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, with Washington saying there are no immediate plans for the two leaders to meet. Professor Georgi Toloroya, professor of Russia Academy of Science, is joining us live from Moscow. Thank you very much for being with us on NewsX World. What is to be read into these latest strikes on both sides, Professor Toloroya? What has been the impact and the damage reports that you've got?
It's simply the war is going on. Before the peace is achieved, the war will go on. And nobody is going to stop the military activities unless there's a clear prospect for peace. And of course, you cannot determine the terms of the final agreement even before the talks have started. So when there are some conditions which are being suggested by EC for Trump-Putin meeting, that means there's no readiness for the real talks. That's very simple. So, okay, the war will go on. It may escalate. And today, Putin have taken part into the train of strategic nuclear force. That's part of Russian being prepared for any scenario. And if there's no meeting of Putin and Trump, well, that means the war will go on.
Yes, Professor Tolaroya, how close or how far are we from a ceasefire?
We're not talking about ceasefire. Ceasefire is just a decoy for rearming Ukrainian force. So when when anybody speaks about ceasefire, that means that just give us a break to rearm and get more reserves and get more armaments. That's not going to happen by itself. Any kind of stoppage to the military activities will be the result of the talks. And if there's no talks, there's no ceasefire.
Yes. Well, how do you react, though, to this supposed setback with the news reports now coming that there is no immediate plan for Putin and Trump to meet, despite earlier suggestions that there were?
Well, this I don't know, because that's the very sensitive issue. Nobody knows for sure, but Putin and Trump probably. But understand there's lots of activities behind the curtains activities, especially by the European leaders to prevent this meeting from happening, starting from the plain, blunt desire to physically stop Putin, not let him get to Budapest, and ending with the lots of behind the curtain talks to President Trump to dissuade him from meeting Putin. So I'm not sure what's going on. It may be the part of the play. Maybe the meeting will finally take place. Speaking frankly, I personally will be surprised if it will take place in Europe, because Europe has explicitly shows its inability and lack of desire, or rather opposition to having such a meeting in its own territory. So it may take place elsewhere, and I don't think that we should be absolutely pessimistic right now. But I have no answer to the question when and where it will happen.
Professor Tolaroya, thank you very much for joining us with your perspective on that story. Moving on now, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky is visiting Norway following an earlier stop in Sweden. He's scheduled to visit Brussels and London later this week. The visit focuses on diplomatic and military support for Ukraine. Zelensky met with Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Store in Oslo to discuss strengthening air defenses, potential joint drone production, and other areas of cooperation. Norway has significantly increased its financial support for Ukraine. This comes as Russia has targeted various Ukrainian cities in overnight strikes. Russian strikes on gas and energy facilities in Ukraine have left hundreds without power, while several people lost their lives as well. President Zelensky says he backs U.S. President Donald Trump's proposal that the current front line should be the basis for negotiations with Russia, but added that he doubts President Putin will accept it.
We had more than 2 hours conversation on different topics with a lot of details. Yes, I think, the most important details what we spoke about, how to defend ourselves, how to have unity and security guarantees, and the place of the United States, which is important in security guarantees for the future of Ukraine, and how now to go to political decisions. I mean, peace negotiations, diplomatic way how to stop Putin. That's why we had a long conversation. After our conversation, you saw messages, public messages from Trump. He proposed stay where we stay and begin conversation. I think that was good compromise, but I'm not sure that Putin will support it. And I said it to President.
Mark Sutherland, geopolitical expert, is joining us live from London. Mark, what was on the agenda of President Zelensky's visit to Norway?
Really good to be with you. Well, the whole thing is about building that, continue to build that consensus, and how he views it of Europe to back him after the invasion from Russia in February 2022. That is what this is all about, in my humble opinion. When he's expressed that view to say, well, where President Trump has said, we need to then ceasefire now, have these negotiations at the battle lines that have actually been drawn. And it was very interesting listening to your previous guest, the professor, and his point of view, where he's made the point, which is to say that people are trying to then we have this opinion, we draw up this agreement before we even start to even negotiate. And as he's made that point very, very clear, the ceasefire is then an opportunity for people to rearm, say whereas he's talking about the Ukrainian side, maybe on both sides. The number one thing that we want to see is to people to come round a table to stop this. And maybe what would be good is to be able to say, right, we'll have a discussion, as the professor has said, we'll have a discussion without any prerequisites on the table. Let's go around there and spend many, many hours, if not days, thrashing all of this out. And as I've just alluded to, with President Zelensky constantly going around European countries, is then wanting support for his nation. You've also talked about that in regard to Meloni of Italy turning around and saying that if we're going to take Russian assets out in regard to financial assets in banks, then it has to be amidst all the letter of the law. All these conversations, all of this chatter happening, and we all want this to stop. We want these people to come round the table. And as the professor has said, that maybe going to Budapest is not a good idea within Europe. So where do we go? The number one thing is, I've said it 4 times now in this conversation, let's get these people around the table and begin that discussion as soon as possible. Yudi.
Yes, Mark, also as far as, this meeting is concerned, it comes also at a time when Russia has continued their attacks on Ukraine. Do you believe that is putting further pressure on Ukraine, to concede, in these negotiations and talks? How do you see those talks also proceeding, looking at this fresh round of fighting that has taken place in both regions?
Well, as your previous guest also said, the fighting is not stopping. The fighting is not stopping. And that is on both sides. We're very aware of the Ukrainians, what they have been doing in regard to drone technology and firing back at the Russian energy and infrastructure and holding their lines as best as possible. We just remind ourselves that the amount of men on the Russian side reported to be 1 million, and near that kind of extreme amount on the Ukrainian side as well, and all the devastation. It's continuing. I think that is what is also frustrating President Trump. But as the professor has laid out, he said it's all very well putting all these, say, prerequisites on the table. We need a peace agreement. We need to stop this. And to all of us on the outside, when you're continuing this war, then there doesn't exchange militarily, then there doesn't seem any hope for actually getting to that point, getting to people around the table. But I also, as he then said, that we do not know. This is, in one sense, this is the theatre that we are seeing. We do not know what is going on behind the headlines to really seek to push to get people around that table. Hence why President Trump a few weeks ago met President Putin in Alaska, also where he's talked about, I know the president because from his first administration. So behind the lines, all we can do is pray and hope that people are genuinely talking to each other to get both sides around the table. But it looks like the military exchanges will still continue.
Yudi. Okay. More breaking news now coming in this hour. In fact, Israeli. Okay, I'll leave it at that, Mark. Thank you very much for joining us with your perspective. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, meanwhile, has hinted at his resistance to Turkish security forces playing a role in the Gaza Strip as part of a US-backed ceasefire mission with Hamas. Speaking with US Vice President J.D. Vance in Jerusalem, Netanyahu said they discussed the day after Gaza, including who would provide security in the war-torn territory. Vance remained optimistic about the ceasefire's success and believed it could help build a better future in the Middle East. Well, the next stage of the US plan includes disarming Hamas and deploying an international stabilization force to support Palestinian police. Turkey, despite tense relations, has agreed to participate in the task force monitoring the ceasefire. Let's listen into what both leaders had to say.
These are days of destiny, and we're very excited to sit down and work together on the Gaza peace plan. We have a very, very tough task ahead of us, which is to disarm Hamas, but rebuild Gaza to make life better for the people in Gaza, but also to ensure that Hamas is no longer a threat to our friends in Israel. That's not easy. I think the Prime Minister knows that as well as anybody, but it's something that we're committed to in the Trump administration. And I think we've, even in the past 24 hours, had a lot of good conversations with our friends in the Israeli government, but also, frankly, with our friends in the Arab world who are stepping up and volunteering to play a very positive.
We obviously decide together who does that. So I have very strong opinions about that.
Mohammed Usman, International Relations Specialist, is joining us live from Cairo. Mohammed, thank you for being with us on NewsX World. What do you make of this latest statement by Israel expressing its resistance to Turkish forces controlling any part of Gaza post this ceasefire agreement?
Thank you for having me, Uday. Greetings to you and to your dear audience. Of course, Israel is being, as usual, an obstructionist force. Turkey is a country, despite the tensions between it and Israel, Turkey is one of the first countries in the Islamic world to recognize Israel and establish diplomatic relations with them back in the early 1950s. So it's rather ludicrous for Israel now to pretend as if Turkey is an enemy. Turkey is a country, a respectable country in the international community that has its sheer reservations on Israel's genocide in Gaza. And yet Israel was very welcoming to the idea of Turkey joining the mediation process along with Egypt and Qatar and the United States in order to reach the latest ceasefire agreement and the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement, which was signed here in Egypt, which is supposedly paves the way for the implementation of the Trump peace plan in Gaza. And one of the agreed upon tenets of this agreement is that an international stabilization force will be deployed into the Gaza Strip. Egypt wants it to be under the auspices of the United Nations, meaning that it should be mandated by a UN Security Council resolution, and that several Islamic and Arab countries will join this force, including Turkey. So suddenly Israel comes up and says, no, we do not agree to Turkey joining this international stabilization peacekeeping force. And if you ask me today, I don't think Israel will even be open to the idea of any international peacekeeping force or stabilization force, whatever you call it, being deployed to any part of the occupied Palestinian territories with a UN mandate, because this would be a huge loss for Israel. Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, well, we're getting more news also coming in this hour. United States Vice President J.D. Vance has expressed his optimism that the newly brokered Gaza ceasefire could serve as a catalyst for deeper regional cooperation in the Middle East. Speaking alongside Israeli PM Netanyahu in Jerusalem, Vance emphasized the strategic importance of the agreement. Let's listen in to what he said.
We're doing very well. We are in a very good place. We're going to have to keep working on it, but I think we have the team to do exactly that. What we've seen the past week gives me great optimism the ceasefire is going to hold. And if we get from where we were a week ago to a long-term durable peace between Israel and Gaza, there are going to be hills and valleys. There are going to be moments where it looks like things aren't going particularly well. But given that, and given the history of conflict, I think that everybody should be proud of where we are today. It's going to require constant effort. It's going to require constant monitoring.
Mohammed Usman, International Relations Specialist, is live with us from Cairo on this story. Mohammed, what is to be read into this latest statement by the United States Vice President on the agreement and on its ramifications ahead too?
It seems that the U.S. is still committed to the maintenance of the ceasefire and the calm in Gaza. However, it's really unclear how the United States is going to move forward with the negotiations with regards to the second phase of the agreement, with regards to the sticking points of the disarmament of Hamas, the full withdrawal of the Israeli army, post-war governance in Gaza, and also the reconstruction efforts of Gaza. So next month in November, there is supposed to be a huge international conference that will take place here in Egypt, which will be hosted by Egypt in order to discuss the reconstruction of Gaza. Yet we hear Jared Kushner yesterday on the side of Vice President J.D. Vance saying that no, the reconstruction will only take place in areas that are under the control of Israel and outside the control of Hamas, and so will the humanitarian aid that will be delivered. It should only be delivered to areas controlled by Israel, and that's about 58% of the Gaza Strip. These are very dangerous statements, Uday, because they do not indicate that the United States is looking for a comprehensive plan of reconstruction that is in line with international law that should take place in the Gaza Strip. And also with the question of disarmament, there seems to be a gap between Hamas and the Americans. Apparently, the Americans understood that Hamas agreed to disarmament. Hamas clearly says that it did not agree to full disarmament and that still this needs to be negotiated with other Palestinian factions and with their Arab partners as well. So it seems that there is some sort of fluidity that is benefiting Israel at this point, which is again is obstructing the agreement and even opposing case provisions of the agreement. Yesterday, the Egyptian chief of intelligence was in Israel, the first visit in years, and he met with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And some reports in some Arab media outlets indicated that there was a huge disagreement between Egypt and Israel because suddenly Israel said that it will not allow the deployment of Palestinian Authority police forces that were trained in Jordan and Egypt to the Gaza Strip in order to maintain security, even though this was part of the Trump plan and the Trump agreement that Israel signed off to. So there seems to be some sort of mismanagement on the part of the United States, and maybe on purpose, of this agreement, because it seems that they see that they have pressured the Israelis enough and that they do not want to pressure them any further, not to jeopardize the relationship any further. However, this will be to the detriment of this agreement, and if the United States does not apply the necessary pressure and commit to the full implementation of the Trump plan and the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement, this war will be back in full force in a few weeks.
Okay. Let me, in fact, thank you there, Mohammed, for joining us with your perspective. Tourists have greeted the reopening of the Louvre Museum, but have questioned whether security measures were adequate after thieves stole historic royal jewelry worth an estimated 88 million euros. Visitors queued up to enter through the Louvre's glass pyramid for the first time since a brazen robbery where hooded assailants had broken in through a second-floor window using a stolen mover's lift and made off with jewels from the royal collection. Some of the tourists and locals have reacted to the situation. Let's listen in.
Bueno, venimos de paseo a Francia. Teníamos muchas expectativas para conocer el Museo Louvre. Lamentablemente sucedió esto y bueno, pues eso ha causado que perdamos nuestras entradas y bueno, para todo el turismo creo que ha sido una baja, ¿no? Para todos y una pena también.
Donc ça nous a quand même un peu préoccupé du fait que on avait pris nos billets il y a quelques mois et quand on a su qu'il y avait eu un vol, on s'est demandé si on allait pouvoir au final visiter le Louvre.
Et là maintenant que c'est bon, vous vous sentez comment de pouvoir y aller?
Là, on se sent sereine de pouvoir visiter le Louvre en toute tranquillité vu que c'est réouvert au public.
Bueno, lo que dicen es que van a devolver el dinero. El museo ha dicho eso, que van a hacer un reembolso a la tarjeta de crédito. Solo queda esperar, no queda otra opción, pues, ¿no? Es una pena, pero bueno, sabemos también lo que ha pasado es algo grave y el museo también ha tomado las medidas del caso, ¿no?
It's certainly increased our fascination with the area. We're not typically museum individuals, but knowing that there had just been a heist pulled off in broad daylight certainly increased the profile of the gallery, no doubt.
And that's all the time we have today on World Report. Stay tuned to NewsX World.